The asteroid wasn't much to look at, not unless you had a thing for craggy rocks and the kind of scenery that made you wonder what life choices brought you there. But under its surface was Galvaton, a city of steel and stubborn human spirit. A place where you could lose yourself if you weren't careful, or if you drank one too many of Old Man Garrett's contraband brews. Commander Vyerk had made a career of not losing himself, at least not too often. His office was a mess of schematics and empty coffee cups, the kind that screamed I'm too important for cleanup duty. Vyerk, a man who wore cynicism like a second skin, looked up from his latest attempt to reorganize chaos when Tessa barged in. She was as subtle as a meteor impact, and today no different. Vyerk, you won't believe this, she said, waving a data pad like it owed her money. Let me guess, Vyerk replied, leaning back in his chair until it creaked in protest. The coffee machines finally declared war on us. No, but close, Tessa grinned, the kind of smile that promised trouble. We've intercepted a signal, another one of those help my spaceship's on fire calls. I thought we agreed those were space junk. Not this one, Tessa insisted, planting herself in front of his desk with the stubbornness of a mule. It's alien and it's not screaming for help. More like whispering about us. Vyerk raised an eyebrow. Whispering. Do we owe someone rent in another galaxy? Tessa threw the data pad onto his desk, data scrolling across the screen like the world's most boring light show. They're talking about us, Vyerk. Something about potential threat and monitor closely. It's like we've been put on some cosmic watch list. Great. We finally made it to the big leagues, Vyerk said, rubbing his temples. Do they know we're stuck in a rock with a questionable air supply and a coffee machine that's 3 steps from sentience? The office door swung open again, this time admitting Martin, the communications officer who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight since birth. His pale face was a roadmap of confusion and muted panic. Commander, Tessa, Martin greeted, his voice as shaky as the city's power grid on a good day. This signal, it's not just idle chatter. They're discussing strategies, ways to contain or eliminate us. Charming, Vyerk said dryly. How thoughtful of them to pencil us into their agenda. Tessa leaned closer, her eyes alight with a mix of fear and excitement. This could be big, Vyerk. We're talking first contact, real aliens who think we're a threat. First contact usually means diplomacy and handshakes, not death threats from the other side of the void, Vyerk pointed out. What do they think we're gonna do? Invade with our fleet of asteroids and broken-down ships? Martin, trying his best to look less like a ghost and more like an officer, added, There's more, sir. A ship. One that doesn't match any known designs. It's been hovering at the edge of our system. Perfect. Our own interstellar stalker, Vyerk muttered. Any chance they're just lost tourists? Not likely, Martin said, managing a weak smile. Their signals too organized, too intentional. Vyerk leaned back, his mind churning with possibilities. None of them pleasant, most of them involving explosions. Tessa, I want you to prepare for a possible engagement. Get the defenses ready, and for God's sake, make sure none of the tech blows up in your face. Way ahead of you, Commander, Tessa said, already halfway out the door. And don't worry, I'll leave the blowing up for the aliens. After she left, Martin lingered, his discomfort practically palpable. Commander, if they think we're a threat, does that mean that we might actually be a threat? Who knows, Vyerk shrugged. Maybe we'll get lucky and scare them off with our charming personalities and state-of-the-art asteroids. Vyerk watched Martin shuffle out, then turned his attention back to the data pad. The alien signal was still there, a constant reminder that Galvaton's peace was teetering on the edge of something much bigger. He didn't like big. Big usually meant trouble. With a sigh, he stood up and walked to the window. Not that there was much to see. Just rock and more rock, the comforting embrace of their asteroid home. He chuckled to himself, a dark sound that echoed off the steel walls. Here's to us, the threat of the cosmos, sitting in our tin can and daring the universe to do its worst. He had a feeling it might just take him up on that. The bustling streets of Galvaton below him were a testament to humanity's resilience. Or was it insanity? Hard to tell the difference some days. People haggled over stale food and questionable tech, the kind of stuff that made you long for the good old days of Earth, if you believed Earth was ever any good. Vyark wandered down to the engineering bay, where Tessa was knee-deep in a control panel, the kind that looked like an angry octopus had vomited wires everywhere. "How's it going, Tessa?" "About as well as you'd expect when you're trying to upgrade tech older than our grandparents." She didn't look up, just kept yanking wires with the determination of someone who really wanted to punch the universe in the face. "Got a message from the mayor, though. Wants to know what the plan is," Vyark sighed. "Tell him the plan is not to die. Seems like a good starting point," she snorted. "He's gonna love that. Maybe he'll give us a medal if we manage to not get obliterated. Yeah, a shiny medal to go with our shiny coffins." Vyark leaned against the wall, watching as she continued to wrestle with the panel. "You think they'll actually come for us? Who? The aliens or the mayor's thugs?" Tessa asked, finally looking up with a smirk. "Either, both. At this point I'm just hoping for a quiet invasion." Tessa gave him a look that said she wasn't quite ready to trade her cynicism for optimism. "I don't know, Vyark. This place. It's held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. But if aliens think we're worth the trouble, maybe we've got something going for us." "Yeah, a lot of targets painted on our backs," Vyark replied. Back in his office, Vyark stared at the data pad again. Still there, still whispering. It was like having a shadow that wouldn't shut up. The signal had to mean something, but what? Fear? Curiosity? A combination of both? Hell, maybe the aliens were just as confused by humans as humans were by bad space opera plots. His thoughts were interrupted by the blaring of an alarm, a sound that promised nothing good. He shot up, cursing as he ran towards the control room, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Inside, the crew was a flurry of activity, controlled chaos as everyone scrambled to figure out what fresh hell had arrived. "Report." Vyark barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Commander Martin called out, eyes wide, fingers dancing over the controls like they were on fire. "That ship, it's moving in. Fast, great. Just what we needed." Faster than a speeding bullet, more exciting than eating expired rations. Vyark joined him, eyes glued to the screen as the ship loomed closer. It was sleek, menacing in that way only advanced alien tech could pull off without effort. "What do they want?" "Looks like they're scanning us, sir. Probably trying to figure out if we're worth the ammo," Martin replied, half joking, half not. "Let's hope they decide we're small fry," Vyark replied, though he wasn't holding his breath. "Commander," Tessa's voice crackled over the comms, interrupting his thoughts. "Defensive systems are online, sort of. Might hold them off if they sneeze too hard." "Good enough," Vyark said. "Let's hope they are allergic to us." The screen showed the ship hanging there, like a cat deciding whether or not to play with its food. Tension hung in the air, thick enough to choke on. Then the ship sent out another signal. This time it was loud and clear, blaring through the speakers with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. "Humans of Galvaton," a voice declared, smooth and condescending. "You are in violation of cosmic regulations. Prepare to be assessed." "Assessed? By whom?" "The intergalactic IRS," Vyark muttered. The control room fell silent, as if everyone collectively held their breath. "What do we do, Commander?" Martin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vyark stood there, words hovering on the tip of his tongue. He knew what he wanted to say, what he had to say. The kind of words that might just buy them some time or doom them all. "Patch me through," he said finally. Martin nodded, fingers darting over the controls until the line opened, a two-way street to whatever bureaucratic hell they were dealing with. "This is Commander Vyark of Galvaton," he announced, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "How can we help our cosmic neighbors today?" The silence that followed was as cold as space itself. "We recognize humanity's potential threat," the voice returned, almost amused. "Prepare for inspection." The line went dead, leaving Vyark staring at the screen. "Well, guess we better clean up," he said, half to himself, half to the room. Wouldn't want to fail the inspection. As the crew exchanged nervous glances, Vyerk's mind raced with plans that didn't involve immediate extermination. It was going to be a long day in Galvaton, and he had a feeling things were about to get a hell of a lot more interesting. The command center of Galvaton hummed with an air of impending doom. Vyerk leaned against the console, arms crossed, mulling over the absurdity that they might actually be worth a cosmic inspection. Maybe it was a cosmic joke. Maybe he was the punchline. Inspection, huh? Martin said, his pale face somehow losing more color. I've failed inspections before, but those didn't come with a side of annihilation. Look on the bright side, Tessa piped in, returning from her battle with the wiry beast of a control panel. At least they're not sending a bill collector. Or maybe they are. Intergalactic subscriptions are a killer. If aliens want to repossess our asteroid, they're welcome to it, Vyerk said with a smirk. See how they like living in a tin can with dubious air and a coffee machine plotting its own revolution. Speaking of which, Tessa added, I finally got something from their signal. It's like listening to a toddler with a megaphone. Lots of noise, little sense. Vyerk arched an eyebrow. And what's the toddler saying? Well, it's less goo goo gaga and more get off my lawn, Tessa replied, chuckling darkly. They're urging us to abandon Galvaton. Apparently, we're disturbing the peace of the cosmos or some such nonsense. Aren't we just the worst neighbors? Vyerk said with mock regret. Did they leave a number to call back, or are we supposed to just guess their intentions? Funnily enough, they're scared of us, Tessa continued, tapping her datapad. Fear of humanity's unpredictable nature. We're like cosmic raccoons digging through their trash and occasionally setting it on fire. Martin snorted. Great. We're terrifying because we might trip over our own laces and accidentally hit the big red button. Or maybe it's our reputation for getting things done despite ourselves. We're a species known for stubbornness and an unhealthy love of explosions, Vyerk mused. Can't entirely blame them for being wary. Imagine being feared for your potential to screw up spectacularly. I feel like we've achieved something here, Tessa concluded, shaking her head. Makes you wonder what they've been spying on, Vyerk sighed, rubbing his temples. Let's focus on what we do best, surviving our own incompetence. We need to figure out how to respond without inviting them to drop by for a massacre. Maybe we should buy them a fruit basket, Martin suggested, only half joking. People like fruit. Do aliens like fruit? Probably allergic, Vyerk replied. If we're lucky, they'll be allergic to us. Just then a voice crackled over the comms, smooth as oil spilled on glass but with a hard edge that could cut steel. Humans of Galvaton, the quorum acknowledges your existence. Your species' unpredictable tendencies pose a threat. Evacuate or face consequences. Consequences, Martin echoed. That's comforting. They must have a whole department for passive-aggressive threats, Tessa said, rolling her eyes. Quorum, is it? Vyerk said, addressing the ceiling as if it were the alien overlords personally. What's next? You going to file a complaint with the cosmic HOA? The line remained silent, as though contemplating how to respond to sarcasm. Vyerk took the opportunity to address his crew. Options, people. Let's assume these quorum folks are serious about their eviction notice. How do we not end up as space debris? Tessa leaned back, thoughtful. We could pretend to surrender, then surprise them with some of our famous human chaos. They wouldn't see it coming. Nobody ever does. Or we could do what we do best, dig in and get ready for one hell of a last stand, Martin said, his voice steady despite the tremor of fear. Not the worst plan, Vyerk admitted. We'd need old man Garrett's brews to keep morale up, though. Nothing says we mean business like facing doom drunk. Speaking of Garrett, I hear he's cooking up something special in the distillery, Tessa mentioned, a mischievous glint in her eye. Maybe we can share a bottle with our visitors. A peace offering if they survive it, Vyerk chuckled darkly. Good old Garrett. He's been violating every safety regulation since birth. A true pioneer. He turned back to the console, the alien ship still looming like an unwelcome storm cloud. Let's get ready to welcome our guests. Tessa, keep working on the signal. Maybe there's more to it, more passive-aggressive demands, you mean? She replied. or maybe a nugget of wisdom. Even a broken clock's right twice a day, Tessa saluted with mock sincerity. Aye, Commander. I'll do my best to decipher their cosmic gibberish. As Tessa returned to her station, Vyerk's eyes flicked to the viewport. There was something menacing about the ship, hanging there like a guillotine. It was enough to give a man indigestion. Whatever happens, at least we'll go down in history, Vyerk muttered, half to himself, half to the universe. Martin, overhearing, offered a grim smile. Or a footnote in someone else's. Footnote, headline, obituary, does it matter? Vyerk replied. Just another day in paradise. The crew worked in tense, focused silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like the asteroid above. Vyerk paced the room, the rhythmic thud of his boots a steady counterpoint to the chaos in his mind. Then, suddenly, the comms blared once more. Humans, heed our warning. The Quorum is prepared to neutralize threats with precision. Precision, huh? Tessa muttered. Let's hope they are as bad at aiming as they are at diplomacy. Maybe they're bluffing, Martin suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Or maybe they're just really good at stating the obvious, Vyerk replied. Either way, we can't sit around waiting for them to make the first move. He turned to Tessa. You got anything else from that signal? Anything that tells us what they're really afraid of? Tessa shrugged, fingers dancing over her datapad. Just more of the same. Fear of our unpredictability, our penchant for survival. It's like they've never seen a B-grade human action movie. Maybe we should send them one. Die Hard in Space, a classic, Martin joked. Or we could show them what happens when you corner a bunch of desperate humans. Vyerk said, eyes narrowing. Whatever it is, they are scared of our capacity for self-sacrifice, Tessa added, tapping the screen. It's like they don't get the whole go down with the ship mentality, or they're just not fans of burning everything down for the sake of a point, Vyerk mused. Either way, it works in our favor. The comms crackled once more, a final ominous warning from their uninvited guests. This is your final notice. Evacuate or face the full might of the Quorum. Full might, huh? Vyerk said with a snort. Sounds like a lot of paperwork, or a really big laser, Martin quipped, checking the systems once again. Well, if it's paperwork, we're definitely doomed, Tessa added, grinning despite herself. Vyerk stood there contemplating their next move. He wasn't fond of waiting, but he was even less fond of needless destruction. Okay, listen up. We're not backing down, but we're not throwing ourselves into the meat grinder either. Let's be smarter than that. What's the plan then? Tessa asked, eyes bright with the challenge. We get creative. Use what we've got, the tech, the people, the stubbornness. We show them what humans are made of, stardust and bad decisions, Martin offered. Exactly, Vyerk said with a grin, dark and determined. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. With renewed purpose, the crew of Galvaton got to work, each member a cog in the well-oiled machine of human tenacity. Whatever the Quorum had planned, they weren't going to make it easy. Not by a long shot. As Vyerk watched his team prepare, he felt a surge of something unfamiliar, hope. Not that he'd admit it out loud. That would ruin his carefully cultivated cynicism. Here's to us, he muttered under his breath. The cosmic cockroaches of the universe. A grim smile tugged at his lips as he turned back to the control panel, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw their way. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against the odds. And damn it, they intended to do just that. Vyerk stood at the center of Galvaton's command hub, staring at the control panel like it owed him money. Tessa was already hunched over her own console, fingers flying across keys like she was trying to beat the devil in a typing contest. Martin, meanwhile, fidgeted nearby, doing his best impression of a man who hadn't just heard their lives were hanging by a thread. All right, folks, Vyerk said, his voice like gravel in a blender. We've got an eviction notice from the universe's least friendly neighbors. How are we feeling? Like someone used my brain for target practice, Tessa replied without looking up. I've got the signal running through every decryption tool we've got, but it's still just static and threats. Classic alien diplomacy, Martin added, glancing nervously at the ceiling, as if expecting the quorum to crash through it at any moment. I miss the days when our biggest problem was running out of coffee filters. Those were simpler times, Vyerk agreed. So, what's our first move? Panic, Martin suggested. Tempting but no, Vyerk replied, turning his attention back to Tessa. Anything useful in that cosmic noise? Not unless you count vague threats and the occasional or else as useful, she sighed. They're really leaning into the whole unpredictable humans angle. Vyerk scratched his chin, the stubble rasping like sandpaper. Then let's give them unpredictable. What about our systems? Everything holding up. Tessa's fingers paused, her expression darkening. About that. I've noticed a few hiccups. Vyerk asked, arching an eyebrow. That doesn't sound ominous at all. Yeah, hiccups. Lights flickering, air circulation cutting out for a few seconds. Minor stuff, but it's getting more frequent. Great. Just what we need, the city getting stage fright. Vyerk raised his voice, addressing the room. All right, listen up. We need to figure out what's causing these malfunctions before Galvaton decides to self-destruct just to spite us. Let's not add any more excitement to our day, Martin muttered, glancing at the nearest ventilation duct suspiciously, as if it might start spitting out alien spores. Hey, if the aliens want to do subtle sabotage, they should have just sent us a cookbook full of inedible recipes, Vyerk said. Tessa, see if you can trace the source of the disruptions. Martin, keep an eye on the systems. We might need to jury-rig some solutions if things go sideways. Like they're not already sideways, Martin quipped, but he moved to a nearby console, starting his vigil. The room settled into a tense rhythm, the hum of machinery punctuated by the occasional curse or sarcastic comment. Vyerk kept his gaze fixed on the viewport, the alien ship still hovering like a bad omen. Who knew space would be full of so many existential crises? He mused aloud. I always thought it'd be more like endless parties and zero-gravity dance-offs, Tessa replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips as she worked. Shows what those recruitment posters know, Vyerk said. Galvaton, come for the existential dread, stay because you have no choice. As if on cue, the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. An uneasy silence followed, only broken by the ever-diligent whir of the control panel. Looks like we've got a poltergeist, Martin said, eyes wide. If it's a ghost, it's a very well-organized one, Tessa replied, her attention still on her console. All right, people, focus, Vyerk snapped. We've been through worse. Remember that time we were stuck in that asteroid field for 3 days? Hard to forget, Tessa replied, grimacing. It was like trying to navigate a drunk's recollection of a labyrinth. And we'll get through this too, Vyerk said, though his voice held more determination than conviction. Keep those systems from falling apart, and we'll deal with the quorum one problem at a time. I'll drink to that, Martin said, though he was already too focused on his console to reach for anything liquid. Vyerk returned to pacing, the room's atmosphere thick with tension. He could almost hear the city straining, gears and circuits working tirelessly to keep everything from crumbling into chaos. Hey, Commander, Tessa called out, interrupting his thoughts. I think I've got something. Vyerk strode over, leaning in to peer at her screen. Enlighten me. There's a pattern to the disruptions, she said, tapping her datapad. It's like someone's playing a bad game of peekaboo with our systems. Not exactly subtle, are they? Vyerk murmured. Can you pinpoint the source? Tessa nodded, her fingers dancing over the keys. It's coming from the lower levels, somewhere in the maintenance access, because that's not ominous at all, Vyerk muttered. All right, let's go take a look. Martin, keep the fort down here. If something blows up, try not to let it be the coffee machine. Martin saluted with mock solemnity. Aye, aye, Commander. I'll hold the line against caffeine deprivation. Vyerk and Tessa made their way to the access hatch, the corridor stretching ahead like a throat leading to the bowels of the city. The air was thick with the scent of burnt circuits and recycled oxygen, a combination that would have been comforting if it didn't promise imminent disaster. Got your flashlight? Vyerk asked, glancing at Tessa. Sort of, she replied, pulling out a small device that looked like it had seen better decades. "It's more of a mood enhancer than a flashlight." "Great," Vyerk said, leading the way into the maintenance shafts. "Let's go see what's making our city tick." The shafts were a maze of wires and pipes, a testament to the ingenuity and desperation of generations past. Vyerk moved with the ease of someone who'd spent too much time in such places, ducking under low beams and stepping over abandoned tools. "Reminds me of my first apartment," Tessa commented, shining her mood enhancer on the walls. "Minus the rats, give it time," Vyerk replied. Galvaton's got plenty of surprises. They reached a junction, the air thrumming with the low hum of machinery. Vyerk stopped, listening. "Hear that, a humming noise?" Tessa asked. "No, that," Vyerk said, pointing to a panel vibrating slightly. "Looks like someone's been busy." Tessa stepped forward, prying open the panel with a practiced motion. Inside, a tangle of wires pulsed with an eerie, intermittent light. "Looks like someone's been playing electrician with a grudge," she observed, examining the mess. "Can you fix it?" Vyerk asked. "Sure, if you've got a spare decade and a lot of coffee," Tessa replied dryly. "I can try to patch it, but it's like trying to fix a leaky dam with duct tape." "Story of our lives," Vyerk said, handing her a toolkit. "See what you can do." Tessa settled in, tools in hand, while Vyerk kept watch, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. His thoughts were a jumble, a mix of strategic planning and more immediate concerns, like how to keep Galvaton from crumbling under their feet. "Got it," Tessa said finally, straightening up. "That should hold for now, but it's a temporary fix. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "Great," Vyerk muttered. "Sabotage from a bunch of aliens too scared to show their faces." "Just what we needed." "Let's get back," Tessa said, wiping her hands on her pants. "If we're lucky, Martin hasn't set the place on fire yet." Vyerk nodded, leading the way back through the shafts. His mind was already racing ahead, trying to anticipate their next move. The Quorum was playing a dangerous game, and he intended to make sure Galvaton came out on top. As they climbed back into the command hub, Martin greeted them with a relieved expression. "Glad you're back." "Everything's still in one piece, more or less," Vyerk replied, eyeing the control panel. "But we've got work to do. The Quorum's got their fingers in our systems, and they're not planning to play fair." "I'm shocked," Martin deadpanned. "Truly." "Let's see what else we can dig up," Vyerk said, turning to Tessa. "Keep working on that signal. If there's any hidden gems in their static, I want to know about it." "On it," Tessa replied, already absorbed in her task. "And Martin, keep those systems running. We're going to need every bit of help we can get." "Consider me your loyal servant," Martin said, saluting again. Vyerk turned back to the viewport, the weight of their situation settling around him like an unwelcome cloak. The alien ship still hung outside, a silent threat that promised more trouble than they could handle. But Vyerk knew one thing for certain: humans were nothing if not stubborn. They'd faced the odds before and come out swinging. And as long as he was standing, he intended to keep swinging right back. "All right, Galvaton," he murmured, addressing the city itself. "Let's show these aliens what it means to mess with humanity." His words echoed in the silence, a promise and a challenge all rolled into one. Because if there was one thing Vyerk knew, it was that humans had a knack for surviving, even when survival seemed impossible. And damn it, they were going to do just that. The air in Galvaton was heavy, like it was contemplating a strike, and the city hummed ominously, as if considering its next move in this cosmic chess game. Vyerk stood in the command hub, his eyes scanning the systems that had so far not yet failed them completely. "Well, folks, looks like the universe has finally decided to play hardball." Martin was hunched over his console, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "You know, I always thought space would be more Starry Night and less Nightmare on Elm Street." "Guess no one told the universe that," Vyerk replied dryly. "Tessa, anything new from the friendly neighborhood invaders?" Tessa didn't look up from her data pad. "Just more love letters from the Quorum detailing our eviction notice. Apparently we've been bad tenants who knew disrupting cosmic peace was such a cardinal sin." Vyark muttered, rubbing his temples. Martin, status on the systems. Martin threw up his hands. Like my ex's commitment issues, flickering, unreliable, and with a tendency to shut down unexpectedly. Charming, Vyark said. Let's keep them running for as long as we can. Tessa, working on decrypting the latest message. Tessa paused, her brow furrowed. It's like they've got a bloody thesaurus of threats. Well, at least they're literate, Vyark said, moving to peer over her shoulder. The quorum's messages were about as welcome as a snake in a spacesuit, full of static threats and intergalactic bureaucratic jargon. They think they can scare us off with words. Before Tessa could respond, the lights flickered violently, and the whole room was plunged into darkness. The familiar hum of the control panel died, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Looks like the universe just pulled the plug, Martin commented. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow over their faces. Let there be light, or at least some semblance of it, Vyark muttered. All right, people, it's time to show these cosmic killjoys what humans are made of, stubbornness and caffeine, Martin offered. Exactly, Vyark replied. Let's get our systems back online before they decide we don't need air to breathe. Tessa was already hard at work, her fingers a blur over the keyboard. I'll try to reroute power from auxiliary systems. It'll be like slapping a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it might buy us some time. Do what you can, Vyark said, moving towards the manual access panel. Martin, help her out. We're not going down because of a little blackout. On it, Martin said, his earlier jitters replaced by a grim determination. I'll see if I can sweet-talk the system into cooperating. Maybe promise it a nice oil bath. As Tessa and Martin focused on getting the power back, Vyark let his mind race. If the quorum wanted to play dirty, he'd show them just how resourceful humans could be when backed into a corner. They'd faced worse odds before, and he wasn't about to roll over and let the aliens win. A sudden inspiration struck him. Tessa, any chance there's a way to trace the disruption back to its source? Tessa looked up, her expression thoughtful. It's tricky but not impossible. If I can get into the hidden passages schematics, we might find where they're hiding. Good. I'm not a fan of being toyed with, Vyark said. See if you can find those plans. The minutes stretched, but finally Tessa sat back with a triumphant grin. Got it. The quorum's been using passages deep within the asteroid. They've got themselves embedded like a tick on a dog. Clever bastards, Vyark said. Let's see if we can smoke them out. Martin, any luck with the systems? Martin nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Got the main systems back online, but it's delicate. Like my patience. Good enough, Vyark said. Tessa, keep those signals coming. If they're hiding down there, we need to know what they're planning. Tessa nodded, already absorbed in her work again. I'll see if I can pinpoint any more weaknesses in their network. They're good, but not infallible. Keep at it, Vyark said, turning back to the viewport. Outside, the alien ship loomed, a silent guardian of their own doom. Let's show these aliens what happens when you underestimate humanity. As if on cue, the systems flickered back to life, the familiar hum of the control panel returning like a long-lost friend. Vyark allowed himself a small smile. They weren't out of the woods yet, but at least they had a fighting chance. All right, he said, addressing the room. We've got our work cut out for us, but we're not going down without a fight. Let's show the quorum why they should have left well enough alone. Martin saluted with mock gravity while Tessa offered a wry smile. They were a motley crew, but they were determined. And as Vyark turned back to the viewport, his resolve hardened. The quorum had poked the bear, and now it was time for the bear to bite back. Time to get creative, Vyark muttered, already planning their next move. Humans were nothing if not adaptable, and he intended to prove that in spectacular fashion. The command hub settled into a tense rhythm, the occasional flicker of lights a reminder of their precarious situation. But Vyark wasn't worried. They'd faced the odds before and come out swinging, and he had no doubt they'd do it again. Let's get to work, he said, the words a battle cry. Asterisk. Hours passed, marked by the steady tap of fingers on keys and the hum of machinery as they worked to counter the quorum's sabotage. Tessa was knee-deep in decrypted messages, her eyes scanning for any clue that might give them an edge. Martin was running diagnostics, looking for vulnerabilities in their defenses. Vyerk paced, his mind racing with possibilities. The Quorum were entrenched, but that didn't mean they were invincible. There had to be a way to turn the tables, to make them regret ever targeting humanity. "Tessa," he called, breaking the silence. "You find anything interesting?" Tessa glanced up, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "If you consider poorly veiled insults and obscure threats interesting, then yes. Well, who doesn't love a good interstellar insult?" Vyerk replied. "But seriously, anything we can use." "Maybe," Tessa said, her fingers dancing over the keys. "I've been picking up snippets that suggest they're not as coordinated as they'd like us to think." "There are disagreements." Vyerk asked, intrigued. "Like, we can't decide on which human to skewer first kind of disagreements, more like whose cosmic bed to piss in next," Tessa said. "They're divided." Vyerk. "It's subtle, but the signs are there." "That's something," Vyerk mused. "If they're not as unified as they appear, we might have a chance to exploit that." Martin joined the conversation, his initial nerves replaced by a growing confidence. "Divide and conquer, eh? Classic." "Exactly," Vyerk said. "If we can find a way to drive a wedge between them, we might just pull this off. Leave it to the humans to find a way to weaponize dysfunction," Tessa said with a grin. "Hey, it's what we do best," Vyerk replied. "Martin, how's the system holding up?" "Like a house of cards in a wind tunnel," Martin said. "But it's still upright, and that's all that counts." "Good enough for me," Vyerk said. "Let's keep the pressure on. If we can get them to show their hand, we might be able to turn this whole mess to our advantage." The three of them settled back into their tasks, the room filled with the quiet determination of those who refused to give up. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. "Vyerk," Tessa called, looking up from her console. "I think I've found something. It's a weakness in their communications network. If we can exploit it, we might be able to disrupt their coordination." Vyerk's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "That's what I'm talking about." "Can you make it happen?" Tessa nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "It'll take some time, but I think I can create a feedback loop that'll scramble their signals." "Do it," Vyerk said. "Martin, you keep those systems stable. We're going to need every ounce of power we can get." "Roger that," Martin said, focusing on his console. As Tessa worked, Vyerk felt a renewed sense of determination. They had a chance, a slim one perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. And as long as there was a chance, he'd fight tooth and nail to make sure humanity came out on top. The minutes ticked by, each second fraught with tension. The alien ship still hung outside, a silent reminder of the threat they faced. But Vyerk wasn't afraid. Humans were nothing if not resilient, and he intended to show the Quorum just how true that was. "Let's do this," he said, his voice a rallying cry. The hum of machinery filled the room, a promise and a threat all rolled into one. And as Vyerk stood there watching as Tessa and Martin worked, he knew one thing for certain: they weren't going down without a fight. "All right, Galvaton," he murmured, addressing the city itself. "Let's show these aliens what it means to mess with humanity." The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Vyerk knew they had a fighting chance. And sometimes, a fighting chance was all you needed. The room had the ambience of a malfunctioning fridge, with the emergency lights flickering just enough to give anyone a migraine. Vyerk stood with his arms crossed, his face a roadmap of frustration, fatigue, and a hint of "I might kill someone soon." Supplies were dwindling faster than Martin's patience, and the atmosphere felt like a pressure cooker about to whistle. Tessa, the walking embodiment of caffeine and determination, glanced up from her data pad. "Vyerk, we've got a problem." Vyerk, who had been staring at the control panel as if it might sprout legs and dance a jig, turned to her. "Another one. Is there a sale on problems?" And everyone forgot to tell me no, but there's definitely a clearance on optimism, she replied dryly. "Rations are running low. We've got enough to last about as long as a snowball in hell." Old man Garrett shuffled in, carrying a jerrycan with the nonchalance of someone who's lived through a dozen near-apocalypses. I've got something that might help. Martin eyed the jerrican suspiciously. What's in there, Garrett? Some new contraband brew. Last time I ended up coughing up fire. Garrett gave a grin that was part mischievous, part well, what do you expect? Just something to keep the morale from hitting rock bottom, or punching through it, Vyerk sighed. We might need something stronger than your swill to get through this. Tessa perked up, an idea sparking in her eyes. Speaking of strong measures, I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime, Martin quipped, earning a mock glare from Tessa. She continued, unfazed. What if we use the asteroid's core as a weapon? The room went silent, each person weighing the possibility. It was the kind of plan that screamed last resort, their Hail Mary that was more likely to end with someone catching fire than with a victory dance. Vyerk looked thoughtful or possibly constipated. It was hard to tell in the dim light. You're suggesting we turn Galvaton into a bomb, more like a really angry beehive, Tessa replied. We channel the energy from the core, direct it towards the quorum's ships. It's risky, but they won't expect it. They're used to us rolling over, not rolling out the big guns. Martin shook his head, his cynicism kicking in. Great, so we're betting on the universe's worst game of Russian roulette. What could go wrong? Everything, Vyerk replied, his voice steady despite the insanity of the plan. But at this point, what choice do we have? The quorum's sitting on our doorstep, and any second now, they're going to knock. Tessa looked at him, her expression a blend of resolve and resignation. It's a gamble, Vyerk. We might win big, or we might end up as space dust. Garrett nodded, rubbing his grizzled chin. Sometimes you gotta play the hand you're dealt, even if it's a pair of twos. Vyerk considered this, feeling the weight of his crew's lives pressing down on him. All right, let's go over this plan. Tessa, get me everything you can on the core. Martin, I want our systems prepped and ready to redirect energy. Martin snorted. Prepped like a turkey on Thanksgiving. Got it. Garrett, Vyerk started, hesitating slightly. Make sure that brew of yours is ready to go. We might need it if this goes south. Garrett gave a chuckle that sounded like gravel rolling downhill. Consider it done, Commander. As they set to work, the room buzzed with a sense of impending doom mixed with a sliver of hope. It was the kind of atmosphere that made you want to laugh, cry, and throw a punch all at once. Vyerk watched his team, the weight of leadership sitting heavy on his shoulders. Just another day at the office, he muttered to himself, knowing full well that today's office hours might be their last. Asterisk hours ticked by like a slow countdown to an inevitable disaster. The command hub felt like a pressure cooker, and the crew were the unfortunate ingredients. Tessa was knee-deep in schematics, her fingers dancing over the keyboard like a pianist playing a particularly grim tune. Vyerk, she called out, not looking up. I've got the readings on the core. It's hotter than a lover's quarrel down there, but it's manageable. Vyerk nodded, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. Manageable is good. Manageable is our new best friend. Martin, hunched over his console, looked like he was ready to punch it into submission. Systems are as stable as a one-legged stool, but they are holding. We've got one shot at this, Vyerk. Less of a plan, more of a prayer, aren't they always? Vyerk said. All right, let's run through the plan once more. Tessa, you'll initiate the core overload. Martin, you'll redirect the energy towards the quorum's ships. Garrett, you'll be standing by with the good stuff. Garrett interrupted, raising his jerrican. In case we need some liquid courage. Vyerk allowed himself a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. If we pull this off, Garrett, I'll drink every drop with you. Garrett raised an eyebrow. You sure you want to make that promise, Commander? My brews have a reputation. I'm betting on us making it out alive, Vyerk replied. And if we don't, well, I'll be too dead to care. Tessa, who had been listening to the exchange with half an ear, suddenly straightened. Vyerk, we've got incoming signals. The quorum's getting twitchy. They might be onto us. Perfect, Martin grumbled. Just what we needed. A cosmic stopwatch counting down to our incineration. Vyerk nodded, his resolve hardening. Then time's not on our side. Let's make it count. The crew set to work with a grim determination, each action a step towards a future uncertain and possibly very short. As the minutes dragged on, Vayek couldn't help but think about the cost of their plan. It was one hell of a sacrifice, and he wasn't blind to the risks they were taking. "Tessa," he called, breaking the tense silence. "You sure about this?" About the core. She glanced at him, her eyes fierce with determination. "As sure as I can be, Vayek. It's risky, but it's our best shot, and if it goes wrong, then we'll be remembered for going out with a bang," she said with a wry smile. "Not exactly the legacy I was hoping for," Vayek muttered, though he couldn't help but admire her bravery. As they worked, the alien ship still hung outside, a silent judge to their desperate acts. The Quorum might have underestimated humanity's stubbornness, but Vayek was about to show them what that really meant. "All right," he said, addressing the room. "We're going to light this candle and see if it burns." Garrett raised his can in a mock toast. "To the end of the world and whatever comes after." Tessa and Martin nodded, and with a shared glance, they all turned back to their tasks. The hum of machinery filled the room once more, a symphony of defiance and desperation. "Let's make them regret ever messing with us," Martin said, a rare glint of fire in his eyes. Vayek nodded, feeling the weight of every decision, every potential sacrifice. But as long as there was a chance, however slim, however fraught with peril, he'd lead his crew through this storm. "Let's show them what it means to be human," he said, his voice a rallying cry against the darkness. The Quorum ship hung there like an uninvited guest at a party, and just about as welcome. Vayek had always thought if he was ever going to be part of a cosmic showdown, he'd at least have a chance to dress for the occasion. Instead, he was stuck in a sweat-stained uniform that smelled like desperation and last week's rations. The command hub was crowded with tension, and the kind of silence you could hear ticking down to an explosion. Vayek's fingers were drumming on his crossed arms, the rhythm of impatience beating against his ribs. Tessa was hunched over her data pad, her face lit with the ghostly glow of schematics, and a frown that suggested murder was not off the table. "Martin, you ready?" Vayek asked, trying to inject some semblance of leadership into his voice. It was difficult when leadership felt like a tightrope walk over an active volcano. "As ready as I'll ever be, which is to say not at all," Martin replied, poking at his console like it had personally offended him. "We've got one shot at this. If it goes tits up, we're going to be the universe's newest crater." "Nice to know you're optimistic," Tessa quipped, not looking up from her screen. "Oh, I'm optimistic. Just not about us surviving," Martin shot back. "It's a nuanced kind of optimism." Garrett shuffled in, clutching his precious jerrican like it was a lifeline. He had a grin that suggested he'd already made peace with the afterlife and wasn't impressed by it. "This stuff's gonna taste like victory, or at least what I imagine victory tastes like. Which is probably just slightly better than defeat." "Comforting," Vayek murmured, glancing at the control panel again. The system's red lights blinked in an irregular pattern that matched his heartbeat, erratic and foreboding. The Quorum had decided to make their intentions clear. Signals were pinging in, garbled and full of what Vayek assumed were promises of doom in a language he didn't particularly care to understand. Static crackled over the speakers like a vinyl record skipping over the best parts. "They're getting closer," Tessa said, her voice flat as she absorbed the data. "We don't have much time." "Well, let's give them a warm human welcome," Martin said, a rare spark of defiance in his eyes. "You know, the kind that involves explosive surprises. Fireworks would be nice," Vayek said, managing a grim smile. "Tessa, get ready to initiate the core overload on my mark." Tessa nodded, her face set with the kind of determination that made you believe she could probably take on a Quorum battleship with a spork if she had to. The command hub descended into a flurry of activity. Garrett fiddled with wires and switches, muttering to himself about the good old days when humanity's biggest problem was which end of a rock to sharpen. Martin's fingers flew over the console, the screens lighting up with commands that might just stop them from becoming an interstellar footnote. "All right, people," Vayek said, his voice carrying over the low hum of machinery. "This is it. If we pull this off, maybe we'll get more than a footnote in the history books. And if we don't, Garrett asked, raising an eyebrow, then we'll be the stars of a cautionary tale. Either way, we'll be famous. Not the legacy I was hoping for, Martin muttered, but there was a glint of resolve in his eyes. Outside, the quorum ships loomed, growing closer with the inevitability of a bad hangover. It was now or never, and Vyerk had never been fond of never. Tessa, on my mark, Vyerk said, his voice steady, even as his heart threatened to make a break for it. Mark, he said, and the air tensed with the anticipation of a drawn breath. Tessa's fingers flew over the data pad, sending commands that Vyerk hoped wouldn't end with them decorating the asteroid belt in a new shade of oops. The control panel lit up, a cacophony of colors that should have been comforting but were more like a disco party in hell. The core was overloading, its energy building in a crescendo that was either going to save them or blow them all to bits. Redirecting the energy now, Martin announced, his voice calm in a way that suggested he had mentally checked out of reality and into screw it, let's see what happens mode. The asteroid rumbled beneath their feet, a low growl that reverberated through the command hub like an old beast waking up from a very long nap. Vyerk grabbed onto the nearest console, steadying himself as the entire structure shook. Hold on to something, he shouted, which was about as useful as yelling duck after you've been hit. Outside, the quorum ships hesitated, probably wondering what the hell humans were doing now. Vyerk couldn't help but grin at the thought of alien confusion. It was a nice change from being the consistently confused party. Energy redirected, Commander Martin reported, his voice pitched with tension. We've got a defensive barrier up, I think. Maybe, great, we've got an I think level barrier, Tessa said dryly. That's reassuring. Vyerk watched the monitors, his breath held tight in his chest. The energy from the core surged, creating a shimmering barrier around Galvaton. The quorum ships were still, as if considering their next move. Vyerk could almost imagine them having a bureaucratic meeting about whether they'd just stumbled into a trap or if humans had finally lost their minds. Barriers holding, Tessa confirmed, a hint of relief seeping into her voice. Let's hope it holds long enough for them to get bored and bugger off, Garrett said, tipping his jerrican in silent toast. Or long enough for us to figure out a better plan, Vyerk added. He didn't want to add if we survive this one, but it hung in the air anyway, unspoken and heavy. The quorum ships began shifting, rearranging themselves with the kind of precision that made Vyerk think of an intergalactic chess game. He'd never been good at chess, mostly because he liked to flip the board when things didn't go his way. They are assessing, Tessa said, watching the monitors like a hawk. Trying to figure out what we've done. Let's hope they take their time, Martin said, leaning back in his chair with an air of nonchalance that was probably more bravado than anything else. Time we don't have, Garrett pointed out, because optimism was not this crew's strong suit. Our supplies won't last if they decide to lay siege. Vyerk drummed his fingers against his armrest, considering their next move. It was a dangerous game they were playing, but then, wasn't life just one big gamble? He'd gotten this far without folding, and he wasn't about to start now. We should take this as a win, Tessa said, her eyes never leaving the screen. For now, at least. We've bought ourselves some time. Time's just another word for not yet dead, Martin said, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips. Then let's make the most of our not yet dead status, Vyerk said, straightening in his seat. We've shown them we're not backing down. Now, we need to figure out our next move. Maybe they'll decide we're not worth the hassle, Garrett suggested, though his tone said he wasn't betting on it. Or maybe they'll come back with more firepower, Tessa added, dashing any hope of an easy resolution. Whatever happens, we'll handle it, Vyerk said, his voice firm. We're not going down without a fight. We've got the element of surprise on our side, and a stubbornness that could rival a mule. Here's to being stubborn, Martin said, lifting an imaginary glass. As they sat in the dim glow of the command hub, the silence was punctuated only by the steady hum of machinery and the distant rumble of the asteroid's core. It was a lull, a moment of stillness before the next storm. Vyerk knew better than to trust it, but for now they had a chance, a slim, precarious chance. And sometimes a chance was all you needed. "Let's get to work," Vyerk said, watching as his crew jumped back into action. They were tired, frayed at the edges, but there was grit and resolve that couldn't be measured. As the quorum ships hovered in the distance, Vyerk couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They'd taken a bold step into the unknown, and damn it if they weren't going to see it through to the end. "Let's make sure they never forget the day they messed with us," he said, a fierce determination lighting his words. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving the impossible. And they were about to remind the universe of that fact in the most unforgettable way possible. Vyerk stood in the command hub, feeling as if someone had replaced his stomach with a bag of angry ferrets. The quorum ships were still hanging there, like unwanted in-laws who hadn't gotten the hint that Thanksgiving was over 3 days ago. Tessa was glued to her data pad, her brow furrowed in that way which suggested she was either solving a complex math problem or considering if slow roasting their alien adversaries was a viable option. "Martin, any insight from our unwelcome guests?" Vyerk asked, hoping for good news but expecting the usual serving of doom. "Insight?" Martin scoffed, not bothering to look up from his console. "Unless you count they're still there as insightful, then yeah, I've got loads of it. They're just admiring our plucky spirit," Garrett chimed in, lifting his jerrican in a mock toast. "Or maybe they've never seen an asteroid dance before, more like waiting for us to screw up," Tessa added, not tearing her eyes away from her screen. "Story of my life," Vyerk muttered, scratching at the stubble on his chin. "But let's keep them guessing, shall we?" With the defensive barrier up, the quorum's advance had stalled. But Vyerk knew it was only a matter of time before they figured out a way around it, or just decided to blast through the energy field in a display of cosmic arrogance. Humanity didn't have the luxury of playing the waiting game. Their supplies were evaporating faster than Garrett's optimism. "Got any more tricks up your sleeve, Commander?" Martin asked, sarcasm dripping from his words like honey from a spoon. "Or are we down to harsh language and wishful thinking?" "Harsh language is about as effective as anything else we've got," Vyerk replied, trying to ignore the knot in his gut. "But let's try something a bit more explosive." A flicker of genuine interest sparked in Tessa's eyes. "You're not thinking of—" "Oh, I'm thinking about it," Vyerk confirmed, his voice carrying an edge of reckless determination. "A controlled core detonation. We blow the core, let the energy surge outwards and hope it's enough to scare them off. Controlled core detonation." Martin grimaced. "They didn't teach us that one at the academy. I'm guessing they didn't teach you how to survive an alien eviction either," Vyerk shot back, a smirk tugging at his lips. Garrett chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "You know, I always wanted to go out with a bang. This seems like a decent enough way." "You're all insane," Tessa said, but there was no malice in her tone, only an acceptance that bordered on camaraderie. "I'll start prepping the sequence. If this works," Martin said, shaking his head, "we'll be legendary. Or infamous. Same thing, really. Just make sure we don't end up as a cautionary tale," Vyerk replied, watching as the others swung into action. The room buzzed with a frenetic energy, everyone moving with a purpose sharpened by desperation. Outside, the quorum ships were repositioning, their elegant maneuvers a stark contrast to the chaos of the command hub. Vyerk imagined the aliens were probably congratulating themselves on a siege well done, smug in the belief that they had humanity cornered. Well, it was time for a surprise they wouldn't forget. "Okay, people," Vyerk called out, his voice slicing through the tension. "We're going to give them a fireworks show they won't believe. Or we'll just smear ourselves across the cosmos," Martin said, though his fingers never hesitated on the console keys. "The universe hasn't gotten rid of us yet," Garrett said, pouring himself a generous shot from his jerrican. "And I don't intend to make it easy for them now." "Cheers to that," Tessa said, her eyes fixed on her data pad as she initiated the core overload procedure. "Ready when you are, Commander." Time seemed to stretch, the moments dragging like a slow, deliberate breath. Vyark knew they were on the edge of something monumental, the kind of gamble that could either cement human ingenuity as a force to be reckoned with or end them in a spectacular failure. "On my mark," Vyark said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He watched as the energy reading spiked, the core pulsing with a volatile brilliance. This was it, the point of no return. "Mark," he said, and the world held its breath. The command hub shook violently, the asteroid trembling under the strain of the artificial seismic event. Vyark grasped the edge of the command chair, eyes glued to the display as the energy unleashed from the core rippled outward. The quorum ships reeled back, their formations scattering like startled birds. It was a sight to behold. The disciplined ranks of alien vessels suddenly thrown into disarray by the sheer audacity of humanity's last-ditch effort. "Well, that got their attention," Martin said, a grin spreading across his face despite the sweat trickling down his temple. The energy wave expanded, a radiant sphere of light that enveloped Galvaton in a protective embrace, its intensity forcing the alien ships to retreat further. For a moment, Vyark could almost see the panic in their ranks, the sudden realization that perhaps these humans were more trouble than they were worth. "Looks like they're reconsidering their life choices," Garrett said with a chuckle, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Or they're just regrouping for another go," Tessa cautioned, though there was a flicker of hope in her tone. "Either way, we've bought ourselves time," Vyark said, feeling the weight of the world lift slightly from his shoulders. "Let's not waste it." The quorum ships were pulling back, their movements cautious and tentative. Vyark knew they were far from safe, but the retreat was a victory they couldn't ignore, a testament to the unpredictability and tenacity that defined humanity. "Keep monitoring their signals," Vyark instructed, turning his attention to the screens once more. "And let's prep for round two, just in case." The room buzzed with renewed energy, the crew rallying around their unexpected triumph. It wasn't over, far from it, but they'd managed to remind the universe that humans weren't to be underestimated. "Tessa, any chatter from our cosmic neighbors?" Vyark asked, hoping for some insight into the enemy's next move. "Mostly static and a few garbled transmissions," Tessa replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But I'd wager they're not happy. They'll get over it," Martin said with a shrug, his fingers dancing over the console. "Or they won't. Either way, we'll be ready." Garrett took a swig from his jerrycan, a satisfied sigh escaping his lips. "Never thought I'd live to see aliens back off from a fight." "Well, you can't blame them," Vyark said, allowing himself a moment of levity. "We're a bit of a handful, understatement of the century," Tessa quipped, returning to her data pad with a determined gleam in her eye. As they settled back into the routine of preparing for whatever came next, Vyark allowed himself a moment to reflect. They'd faced down an impossible threat with nothing but their wits and a dose of madness. It was a testament to what they could achieve when their backs were against the wall. "Here's to making it through another impossible day," Garrett said, raising his jerrycan in salute. "And to whatever the universe throws at us next," Martin added, a defiant spark in his eyes. The command hub was abuzz with the sound of activity, the crew moving with a sense of purpose and camaraderie that was hard-earned and well-deserved. Vyark watched them with a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. They'd faced the impossible and come through the other side, battered but unbroken. "Let's keep reminding them why humans are a force to be reckoned with," Vyark said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared resolve. The quorum might regroup, return with greater numbers, or decide that this sector wasn't worth the effort. But whatever their decision, Vyark knew they'd be ready. They'd faced annihilation and emerged stronger for it, bonded by the shared experience of daring to defy the odds. And in the grand scheme of the universe, that was something worth fighting for. The aftermath of their impromptu cosmic fireworks show was like the morning after a wild party, messy, loud, and thoroughly satisfying. The command hub was a flurry of activity with blinking lights, anxious chatter, and the ever-present scent of burning electronics. You'd think by now the smell of singed circuits would be comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold night. But no, it still reeked of impending doom. Commander Vyark, ever the picture of stoic cynicism, surveyed his ragtag team. They were a motley crew, each one more stubborn and irreverent than the last, but against all odds they'd pulled it off. Not that anyone was counting on a sequel anytime soon. So do we send the quorum a thank you note for the free retreat practice? Martin quipped, his fingers dancing over the console, occasionally giving it a light tap as if convincing it to behave. If they had a sense of humor, we might have tried sarcasm, Vyark replied, rubbing the back of his neck. But I'm guessing they're more the revenge now. Laugh never type. Laughing is overrated, Tessa piped up, still glued to her data pad. Especially when you're out of coffee. Speaking of which, is the coffee machine still staging its own rebellion? Garrett asked, peering suspiciously at the corner where the machine sat, ominously silent. Last thing we need is for it to join forces with the quorum. Tessa chuckled dryly, her eyes never leaving the screen. It's safe for now. But I wouldn't trust it any more than I trust Garrett's sense of direction. Hey, Garrett protested, raising his jerrican in mock offense. I got us here, didn't I? Barely, Vyark interjected, though there was a trace of fondness in his voice. But it's not the time to argue over whose fault it is we're out here. Time to focus on rebuilding. The mood shifted slightly, the weight of reality sinking in. Galvaton was still an asteroid by definition, but now it was humanity's testament to defiance. They'd not only survived, they'd sent a message to the galaxy. Humans didn't roll over easily. Let's start with the essentials, Vyark said, adopting his commander tone, which was slightly less sarcastic but no less sharp. We need to patch up the systems, check our supplies, and figure out how to stretch what little we've got. Is that your fancy way of saying we're still screwed, just with less immediate danger? Martin asked, raising an eyebrow. Pretty much, Vyark admitted, because optimism wasn't his forte. But we've bought ourselves time, and that's something. Not to mention the priceless satisfaction of confusing the hell out of the aliens, Garrett added, grinning as he took another swig from his increasingly empty jerrican. What about you, Tessa? Vyark asked, shifting his gaze to her. What do your numbers say? Tessa looked up, her expression unreadable except for the twinkle of mischief in her eyes. Well, numbers don't lie, but they can be pessimistic little bastards. They say we've got enough supplies to last a month if we're careful. A month? Martin repeated, sounding pleasantly surprised. That's practically a lifetime in our line of work. Does that include Garrett's liquid courage? Vyark asked, eyeing the jerrican with mock suspicion. It might, Tessa conceded, but I doubt it's as vital a resource as air. Garrett feigned a look of horror. Blasphemy. You wound me, Tessa. Focus, people, Vyark interjected, though he couldn't entirely suppress a smile. We've made it this far. Let's not push our luck. The crew dispersed, each falling into their respective roles with an ease born of necessity. They'd become a family of sorts, bonded by adversity and a shared penchant for gallows humor. It was the kind of camaraderie that only came from facing down death together and emerging on the other side. Vyark leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He'd been at this game long enough to know that quiet moments were rarer than a politician's honesty. And yet here they were, still standing, still fighting. Hey, Vyark, Tessa called, breaking his reverie. Got a sec for you? Always, he said, dragging himself up from his seat and crossing the room to where she stood, her data pad clutched in one hand. What's up? She hesitated, a rare sight in itself. Tessa was about as skittish as a brick wall. I've been thinking. About what we did here. Dangerous pastime, he joked, but his tone was gentle. I know, she replied, giving him a sidelong glance, but hear me out. We've shown the universe that humanity isn't just stubborn. We're resourceful, unpredictable. That's a hell of a combination. He nodded slowly, taking in her words. We're a bit of a nightmare, aren't we? More like a horror story they didn't see coming, she agreed, a small smile playing on her lips. We've made a mark. We've shown them that we can't be easily pushed around. Vyark leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So what's next then? Retire on a beach somewhere with a cold drink and a good book, maybe, she replied with a laugh, or we keep pushing boundaries. There's a lot more galaxy out there to explore. Optimistic coming from you, he teased. She shrugged, her expression softening. Maybe it's the adrenaline talking, or the fact that we're still alive when we shouldn't be. Fair enough, Vyark said, glancing around at the controlled chaos of the command hub. Whatever happens next, I think we've earned a little celebration, even if it's just a we didn't die today party. Tessa asked, arching a brow. Especially if it's that, he replied, clapping her on the shoulder. Get back to work. We'll figure out the details later. As Tessa returned to her data pad, Vyark walked back to his seat, the weight of leadership not so heavy for once. Their victory, however temporary, was a reminder of what they were capable of. They'd faced annihilation and given the galaxy a reason to reconsider its stance on humanity. Sure, there was still a long road ahead. Supplies were limited, their future uncertain, and the universe was as hostile as ever. But that was the thing about humans. When pushed, they pushed back harder. Martin's voice cut through the ambient noise like a bolt. Commander, you might want to see this. Vyark made his way over to the console, his eyes narrowing at Martin's expression, a mix of amusement and disbelief. What now? Got a signal coming in, Martin said, shaking his head. Looks like the Quorum's trying to get in touch. Again, they sure know how to pick their moments, Vyark muttered, gesturing for Martin to put it on speaker. Let's see what they want. The crackling static gave way to a series of garbled words, the alien language a jumble of syllables that somehow managed to convey both annoyance and grudging respect. Think they are offering us tea and crumpets? Garrett asked, sidling up with his jerrican in hand. More like threats and ultimatums, Tessa replied, listening intently. Vyark held up a hand for silence as the message continued, the meaning becoming clearer by the second. The Quorum, it seemed, had decided that an uneasy truce was preferable to continued hostilities. They weren't retreating exactly, but they were willing to give humanity a wide berth, at least for the time being. Well, that's something, Vyark said once the message ended, glancing around at his team. Looks like they've decided we're more trouble than we're worth. Guess they are not wrong, Martin said, a wicked grin on his face. About time someone realized how obnoxious we can be. Still doesn't solve the long-term issues, Tessa pointed out, though there was a lightness to her tone that hadn't been there before. But it's a start. A start's all we need, Garrett said, raising his jerrican once more. Here's to scaring the hell out of the universe. Here's to us, Vyark echoed, feeling the warmth of camaraderie spread through the room. We're not done yet. As the crew resumed their tasks, Vyark took a moment to savor the victory, however small. They'd stood on the brink and refused to go quietly. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about showing the universe that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. For now, they'd keep rebuilding, keep fighting. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but damn if they weren't ready to meet it head-on, armed with nothing more than their wits and a healthy dose of irreverence. Back to work, everyone, Vyark called, a spark of determination in his voice. Let's make sure our friends out there know exactly who they're dealing with. And with that, the crew of Galvaton returned to their tasks, each one fueled by the knowledge that they'd defied the odds once more. The universe might not have changed overnight, but they'd made a mark, and that was enough. For now.